At 55, Richard Thornton should have been enjoying the fruits of his labor. After 3 decades of building Thornton Construction into the largest commercial contractor in the county, he'd sold the company to focus on his true passion, Green Valley Links, the private 9-hole golf course he designed and built from scratch. This wasn't just any retirement project, it was a living memorial to Eleanor, his wife of 32 years, who'd lost her battle with cancer shortly after he broke ground. The course layout followed her original sketches, drawn on hotel stationery during their last anniversary trip to Scotland. "Build something that brings joy," she'd said, "something that lasts." For 15 years, Richard had done exactly that. Green Valley Links became the crown jewel of Riverwood Estates, their upscale planned community 30 minutes outside Atlanta. Members praised its challenging yet playable design, impeccable maintenance, and the personal touches that larger courses couldn't match. Richard knew every member by name, remembered their children's birthdays, and took genuine pride in their improving handicaps. The course's signature was the 9th hole, a challenging par 4 with a dogleg right that wrapped around Eleanor's garden, a stunning landscape of yellow roses, her favorite. The memorial bench there overlooked the entire course and the mountains beyond, exactly the view that had made her fall in love with this property decades ago. Due to the original development agreement, Richard's property technically fell under the Riverwood Estates HOA jurisdiction. Through a complex legal arrangement, though he held the deed, this unusual setup caused no issues. He paid his dues, followed reasonable regulations, and the HOA respected his autonomy. The course hosted community events, charity tournaments, and free youth programs that benefited everyone. That delicate balance shifted dramatically 6 months ago when Priscilla Westfield, 46, was elected HOA president. The former Silicon Valley executive had moved to their community after burning out from tech culture, bringing with her ambitious plans to modernize Riverwood Estates. At her first meeting, she unveiled a 5-year sustainability roadmap focused on reducing the community's carbon footprint. While charming, certain amenities like private golf courses are environmental dinosaurs, she declared, making direct eye contact with Richard from across the room. Progressive communities are reimagining these spaces for the 21st century. Richard approached her afterward, extending an olive branch. "I'd be happy to discuss eco-friendly improvements to Green Valley Links. We've already reduced water usage by 30% with native plantings and smart irrigation." Her smile never reached her eyes. "How quaint," she replied, "but I'm thinking of something more transformative." Richard should have recognized the warning signs. Instead, he dismissed her as another bureaucrat with big talk and little action. That was his first mistake. Tuesday, April 15th, 6:18 a.m. Richard remembered the exact moment because he'd just checked his watch, calculating whether he had time to walk the full course before his 8 o'clock meeting with the groundskeeping team. The morning was perfect, crisp spring air, dew still clinging to the grass, birds just beginning their morning songs. Then came the rumble, not distant thunder, but the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. Following the noise to the first hole, he found a convoy, 3 flatbed trucks loaded with solar panels, a small excavator, and 24 workers in high-visibility vests unloading equipment. Priscilla stood in the center, clipboard in hand, hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, issuing commands like a field general. When she spotted Richard approaching, still in his robe and slippers, her expression shifted from concentration to practiced sympathy. "Richard, you're up early. I was going to call you once we were properly set up. What the hell is happening on my course?" Richard's voice sounded strange, even to his own ears, too calm considering the storm raging inside him. "The Riverwood Estates Sustainability Initiative," she announced as if unveiling a new community center. Phase 1 involves installing 254 solar panels across the property to power our community buildings. The board voted unanimously last month. On my property? Without so much as a phone call. Her smile tightened as she thrust a document into his hands. Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the HOA Covenant grants us authority to implement community improvement projects on all Riverwood properties. We're reducing our carbon footprint by 35% and saving the community $50,000 annually in energy costs. Everyone wins. Richard's eyes frantically scanned legal language he'd never fully examined, words about common welfare and improvement initiatives that suddenly threatened everything he'd built. This is insane. You can't just. We sent official notifications 6 weeks ago, she interrupted, checking her watch with exaggerated patience. Your lack of response constituted tacit approval under the bylaws. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have precisely 11 minutes to complete this section before the county inspector arrives. That notification turned out to be a single email with the innocuous subject line, Quarterly HOA Newsletter Special Energy Supplement, buried among dozens of promotional messages, a deliberate tactic, Richard later confirmed. With one deliberately obscured communication, they'd claimed authority to destroy his life's work. By 9:30 a.m., they'd already installed 20 panels along the first fairway, digging into his meticulously maintained turf with shocking efficiency. His calls to board members went straight to voicemail. His lawyer arrived at 10:15, reviewed the documents while sweating through his shirt, and delivered the devastating news. While the HOA is pushing legal boundaries, the covenant's vague wording might give them just enough cover to proceed. A lawsuit would take months, possibly years, he explained, genuine regret in his voice, and there's no guarantee of victory given the language you agreed to when purchasing the property. By noon, Richard had moved from shock to desperate action. He positioned his golf cart to block access to the second hole, arms crossed, refusing to move. Priscilla's response was immediate and calculated. Either remove yourself, or I call the police for obstruction of a legally approved community project. He stood his ground, calling what he thought was a bluff. 20 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. After reviewing Priscilla's paperwork, the older officer, a member who'd played his course dozens of times, pulled him aside with genuine regret. Richard, I'm sorry, but their paperwork appears to be in order. If you physically interfere, we'll have to take action. This needs to be fought in court, not here. As they escorted him back to the clubhouse, he caught Priscilla's satisfied smirk. This wasn't about sustainability. This was about power and control, with his beloved course as collateral damage. Richard, I understand this is difficult, Priscilla said, following him to the clubhouse steps, her voice artificially sympathetic but her eyes cold. Change is always challenging for people of your generation. Richard stopped and turned to face her. This isn't about change, Priscilla. This is about theft, he replied evenly. You're destroying something I've built over 15 years without so much as a proper conversation. She stepped closer, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing toward his chest. The HOA has every legal right to implement community improvements. Your golf course is an underutilized space that could better serve everyone's interests, not just yours. Perhaps if you'd attend more meetings instead of playing golf all day, you'd understand the direction we're taking Riverwood Estates. The officers watched uncomfortably as they faced off, the contrast stark between Richard's weathered golf attire and her crisp business casual outfit. The solar panels gleamed in the background, a perfect tableau of their conflict, tradition versus Priscilla's version of progress. By Friday afternoon, Richard's once beautiful golf course was unrecognizable. 254 solar panels stood in uniform formation across the landscape, but not in the orderly rows you might expect. They were positioned for maximum disruption, blocking sightlines from tees, surrounding greens like metallic sentinels, creating impossible angles for approach shots. Most heartbreaking was the 9th hole. 12 panels now surrounded Eleanor's garden, their shadows falling across her yellow roses. The memorial bench now faced not the mountains, but a wall of gleaming silicon and metal. The panels weren't just eyesores, they'd been installed with deliberate disregard for the course's function. Fairways were torn up by construction equipment, sprinkler lines cut and hastily repaired, drainage patterns altered. It wasn't incompetence, it was calculated degradation. Richard's phone wouldn't stop ringing as members expressed their shock and regret. Richard, I'm heartsick about this, but we can't play with those things everywhere. Is this even safe? What happens when a ball hits one of those panels at full speed? My son was counting on those youth lessons this summer. What are we supposed to tell him? Within a week, membership cancellations reached 85%. His staff, Miguel and his grounds crew, who'd been with him for a decade, Sarah, who ran the pro shop, and Tom, their club pro, gathered in the clubhouse, faces grim. As Richard explained he could only keep them on for another month without new revenue, Miguel said firmly, "We're not leaving you, boss. We'll cut our hours if needed, but we're staying until this gets fixed." Their loyalty only sharpened his sense of responsibility. These weren't just employees, they were family, with mortgages and children in college. Every solar panel wasn't just destroying his dream, it was threatening their livelihoods. Meanwhile, Priscilla orchestrated her victory tour, leading community groups across his property, calling it the Riverwood Estates Solar Park. Richard watched from the clubhouse as she gestured dramatically at the panels, beaming with self-satisfaction. She wore that same smug expression he'd seen in the thumbnail moment of their confrontation, when she'd stood there lecturing him about his responsibilities to the community while solar panels glinted behind her. "This underutilized land has been transformed into a community asset," she announced to a group of potential homebuyers. "It's exactly the kind of forward-thinking initiative that sets Riverwood Estates apart." "Underutilized?" Richard muttered. "Last year alone, we hosted charity tournaments raising over $100,000 for local causes, provided free golf lessons to 75 disadvantaged youth, and established college scholarships for our maintenance staff's children. We'd created a certified wildlife habitat, recognized by the Audubon Society. We weren't just a golf course, we were a community cornerstone." That evening, after everyone had left, Richard sat alone in his office, reviewing their dwindling finances, when Miguel knocked on his door. His expression was odd, a mixture of anger and excitement. "You need to see what we found, boss." He led Richard to the maintenance shed, where two members of his crew waited with a large plastic bin. They'd discovered it half-buried near the new electrical connection. Inside was a treasure trove, the solar company's installation contract with sections highlighted in red, internal HOA emails accidentally included in the paperwork, county permit applications with falsified signatures, most damning. A letter from Solarite LLC thanking Priscilla for expediting the approval process and confirming her brother-in-law's 15% ownership stake. "They were never supposed to leave this behind," Miguel said. One of their supervisors was furious when he couldn't find it. For the first time that week, Richard felt something beyond despair, the first spark of hope. They'd been careless, cutting corners in their rush. Now he had proof. While Richard reviewed the documents, a call came from George Harmon, an 80-year-old retired federal judge and founding member. "Richard, we're hearing disturbing things about this solar project. A group of us wants to meet tomorrow morning, Saturday, 6:30 a.m. The rising sun cast long shadows from the solar panels across what remained of his first green. Richard hadn't slept, spending the night organizing the evidence and formulating a plan. He stood on the clubhouse porch, watching Priscilla lead yet another tour, this time for local media she'd invited to cover her environmental leadership. The small crowd included the mayor and 2 county commissioners, all nodding appreciatively as she gestured toward his ruined course. A profound calm settled over him, not resignation, but clarity. Sometimes in construction, when a foundation is fatally flawed, you don't repair it, you break it down and start over. This situation required the same approach. He walked to the equipment room and selected his favorite Callaway driver, Eleanor's last gift to him on their final anniversary. "For when you need that extra distance," she'd said. If only she could see how right she was. With a bucket of premium practice balls and the incriminating documents tucked into his back pocket, he strolled to the first tee, just as Priscilla's tour reached the edge of the green. The mayor noticed him first, waving with uncomfortable recognition. He'd played in their charity tournament just 3 months ago. Priscilla's expression shifted from confident presenter to wary opponent in an instant. "Richard, this is a closed media tour. Perhaps we can schedule time for your concerns afterward." Richard placed a ball on the tee, taking his time. The small crowd watched with growing interest as he took 2 measured practice swings. "Richard," Priscilla's voice sharpened with authority, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "Playing golf on my golf course." His swing was textbook perfect, the result of 15 years of daily practice. The ball launched with a satisfying crack, soaring in a beautiful arc before striking a solar panel dead center. The impact reverberated across the suddenly silent landscape, followed by the musical tinkling of shattering glass. Everyone froze. The mayor's mouth fell open. One of the reporters instinctively raised her phone to record. Priscilla recovered first, face flushing with anger. "That's destruction of community property. This is criminal vandalism." Richard calmly placed another ball on the tee. "No, Priscilla, that's golf. I'm simply playing through the obstacles illegally placed on my course." "Officer," she gestured frantically to a police officer who had been accompanying the tour, "arrest him immediately." The officer approached cautiously, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, I can't allow you to deliberately damage property." "Before you decide what's deliberate," Richard replied evenly, "you might want to review these documents." He handed him the installation contract and permit applications. "Pay special attention to the falsified county inspector signatures, the missing environmental impact study, and this conflict of interest disclosure showing the HOA president's family connection to Solarite LLC." As the officer scanned the pages, his expression transformed. The mayor stepped forward, hand extended. "May I see those as well?" Priscilla's carefully constructed facade began crumbling. "Those are internal HOA documents. You have no right." "Actually," interrupted George, walking up behind him with 15 senior members in golf attire, "as homeowners subject to HOA governance, we have every right to review all documents related to expenditures and projects, particularly those implemented without proper procedure or permits." George wasn't alone. Behind him, a stream of cars entered the parking lot, former members, neighbors, even competitors from other golf courses. Word had spread overnight through texts and calls, a grassroots response to overreach. The officer finished reviewing the documents and radioed for his supervisor. "I'm going to need to take these to the station. This isn't right." "In the meantime," Richard said, addressing the growing crowd, "Green Valley Links is open for play. Green fees are waived today, but I warn you, we have some unusual hazards." What began as an act of defiance transformed into something extraordinary. By noon, over 60 golfers of all ages and skill levels were playing the Solar Panel Challenge, as someone dubbed it. Each cracked panel was met with cheers, each creative shot around the obstacles applauded. They didn't damage every panel, that would be too obvious. Instead, they created a pattern of accidental damage that rendered the array ineffective while maintaining plausible deniability. George proved particularly skilled, his decades of experience allowing him to bank shots off panel frames with surgical precision. 30 years as a judge taught me all about using the system's framework against itself, he quipped after a particularly impressive ricochet shattered a panel near Eleanor's garden. Priscilla called the police repeatedly, but with each visit, officers became increasingly reluctant to intervene. The documents Richard discovered had triggered an official investigation, with county inspectors now questioning the entire project's legality. By Sunday afternoon, news vans lined their entrance. "Solar Showdown, Community Fights HOA Overreach," read the headline crawling across the local station's live truck. The story had touched a nerve, not just locally but nationally, tapping into widespread frustration with HOA power. The reporter approached as Richard lined up a shot. "Mr. Thornton, do you consider your actions civil disobedience?" He paused, considering the question. "I consider them self-defense. When someone illegally damages your property and threatens your livelihood, you have the right to protect what's yours." Priscilla attempted damage control, hastily organizing a press conference in the community center. "This is a legitimate sustainability project that benefits everyone," she insisted, voice tight with suppressed rage. One disgruntled business owner shouldn't derail progress. But the narrative had already shifted. Community members began coming forward with other grievances, arbitrary rule enforcement, selective approval of home improvements, suspicious contracting decisions. The solar project wasn't an isolated incident, but a pattern of governance issues. Monday morning brought the county inspector, who officially suspended the project pending investigation. Preliminary review indicates multiple code violations and permit irregularities, he announced gravely. All work must cease immediately, and no electrical connection is authorized. Priscilla's final countermove was dispatching workers to install protective cages around the remaining intact panels, which they quickly incorporated into their play. Bank shots off the cage frames became a competition category, with spectators rating each attempt on creativity and execution. By Tuesday, #HOAVSRichard was trending across social platforms. Eleanor's nephew, an investigative reporter for the regional news, aired a special report revealing the project's full improprieties. No environmental impact study for a protected wetland area, no proper electrical permits, no safety assessments for flying golf balls, and clear documentation of self-dealing and conflicts of interest. Most damning was the leaked audio from a private HOA meeting where Priscilla had outlined her real motivation. This golf course is prime real estate. Once we establish control through the solar project, we can push forward with rezoning for the condo development. The property value increase will benefit us all. The footage from Richard's security cameras became the centerpiece of local news coverage, capturing Priscilla's confrontation with him in perfect detail. There she stood, finger pointing in his face, lecturing him about community responsibility, while he stood with arms firmly crossed, the destroyed golf course and solar panels clearly visible behind them. That image became the symbol of HOA overreach across social media, with thousands sharing their own stories of HOA tyranny. Regional golf publications picked up the story next. Fairway Highway Robbery read one headline. Another featured a photo spread comparing the before and after shots of his once immaculate course. Golf pros from across the country began sending messages of support, with 3 PGA Tour professionals even posting videos of themselves deliberately hitting balls at cardboard solar panel targets in solidarity. His phone rang Wednesday morning. It was Ted Sawyer, president of the American Property Rights Coalition. "Richard, what you're doing isn't just about golf," he said. "It's about standing up to bureaucratic overreach. We'd like to feature your story in our national campaign." By Wednesday evening, Richard's simple act of playing golf on his own course had transformed into something much larger, a movement that resonated with people far beyond their community. What Priscilla never understood was that she hadn't just attacked a golf course, she threatened a principle that Americans hold sacred, the right to protect what's yours from those who abuse their authority. Wednesday's emergency HOA meeting required relocation to the high school auditorium to accommodate the crowd. Every seat was filled, with residents lining the walls and spilling into the hallway. Priscilla arrived flanked by 2 attorneys, her usual confidence replaced by rigid defensiveness. For 4 hours, residents voiced complaints, presented evidence, and demanded accountability. The attorneys' attempts to limit discussion were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of testimony. The solar initiative was designed to benefit everyone, Priscilla insisted when finally allowed to speak. "We're saving money and helping the environment by destroying a certified Audubon wildlife habitat," countered Susan Williams, a 67-year-old environmental scientist. "I've reviewed your proposal. Did you know that golf courses naturally sequester more carbon than these panels will offset for their first 8 years? Where's the environmental impact study that would have shown that? And what about the $155,000 contribution your brother-in-law made to your city council campaign fund 2 days after the contract was signed?" she asked, presenting bank records. "Or the email where you discuss keeping Richard in the dark until installation begins?" Evidence mounted. Emails proving Priscilla had deliberately scheduled the vote when 3 opposing board members were traveling, documentation that she had instructed IT to route his notification to spam filters, testimony from a whistleblower at Solarite about rushed installation and skipped safety protocols. Most shocking was the revealed plan for Phase 2, converting the underperforming golf course to luxury condominiums, with Solarite's parent company as the developer and Priscilla receiving a consulting fee of $75,000. After 4 hours of damning revelations, the vote to remove the panels and censure the board passed 173-3. Priscilla resigned on the spot, hurrying out a side door to avoid the press now swarming the entrance. The panel removal began the following day, conducted with far more care than the installation. Within a week, his course was physically cleared, though many areas would need extensive restoration. The scars were evident: brown patches where panels had blocked sunlight, trenches from hasty electrical work, damaged irrigation systems. The new interim HOA leadership, headed by George, immediately implemented comprehensive reforms. Explicit written permission would be required from property owners for any improvements affecting their land. Transparent bidding processes would be mandatory for all contracts. Monthly financial disclosures would be published, and all meetings would be recorded and archived. But the most unexpected development came from the community itself. An anonymous resident, later revealed as a retired professional golfer who'd recently moved to Riverwood Estates, established the Green Valley Links Restoration Fund with a $50,000 donation. Within days, the fund swelled to over $120,000 as community members, golfers from across the region, and even companies specializing in golf course maintenance contributed. The county investigation resulted in Solarite facing significant fines for permit violations and Priscilla facing ethics charges related to conflict of interest and misrepresentation in official documents. Her political aspirations collapsed under the scandal, with her planned city council campaign abandoned before it began. 3 weeks after the panel's removal, Richard stood with Miguel, surveying the healing landscape. The damage was extensive but not irreparable. With proper care, Green Valley Links would not merely recover, but emerge stronger. "We should reopen for the fall season," Miguel suggested, his experienced eye assessing the restoration progress. "Maybe redesign a couple of holes while we're at it." "I always thought the fourth could use more challenges." Richard nodded, realizing something important. In trying to destroy his course, Priscilla had inadvertently secured its future. The public had brought new interest, the community had rallied around its preservation, and the HOA reforms guaranteed protection from similar threats. Today, Green Valley Links is thriving beyond his wildest expectations. Membership has tripled, with a waiting list for the first time in their history. The course restoration became a community project, bringing together people who'd barely interacted despite being neighbors for years. He did install solar panels, properly permitted and thoughtfully integrated, on the clubhouse roof and maintenance buildings, powering their operations and reducing energy costs by 40%. As he told the local paper, sustainability doesn't have to come at the expense of community treasures. It works best when it enhances what we already value. Eleanor's garden has been expanded into a half-acre butterfly sanctuary that doubles as a stunning natural hazard on the redesigned 9th hole. The new memorial bench includes a plaque with her favorite saying, "Stand your ground for what matters, but always leave the world more beautiful than you found it." That memorable image of their confrontation, Richard standing with arms crossed while Priscilla pointed her finger in his face, solar panels gleaming behind them, now hangs framed in the clubhouse as a reminder. Beneath it reads, "The day we learned that some hazards aren't meant to be played around." The irony isn't lost on anyone that Priscilla's solar panel invasion, meant to diminish the golf course, instead immortalized it. Last month, Golf Digest featured Green Valley Links in their American Classic series, with the writer noting that sometimes it takes nearly losing something to recognize its true value. Perhaps the most satisfying development came 6 months after the showdown. Their state legislature passed the Property Rights Protection Act, nicknamed the Solar Panel Law by local media. It requires explicit written consent and fair compensation for any HOA modifications to privately owned property. The bill's sponsors cited their case as their inspiration. Every morning, Richard still walks the course at sunrise, coffee in hand, checking the conditions and greeting early players. But now he's rarely alone. Members often join him, sharing stories and suggestions as they make their way through the mist-covered fairways. The Solar Panel Showdown, as it's now affectionately known throughout the golfing community, taught him something essential. When facing overwhelming opposition, sometimes the most powerful move isn't a lawsuit or angry confrontation. It's simply continuing to do what you love with unwavering determination. Remember this: if you ever face your own HOA overreach or any injustice, the most effective response often isn't escalation but demonstration. Show the world exactly what's at stake, and when the moment demands it, take your best shot and play through.